Okay, so we're back. What we have here is now we have our legs done. We have the master control created with all the everything set up underneath the master control for the things that scale, and the things that don't scale go in the no scale group. Okay, so the next step that we have to do is start on the arms. What you'll notice is that my hands have not been connected to my arms yet, and the reason that I do that is sometimes when you put IK handles on arms, they can move the arm chain just a little bit, and when that happens, if the hands are connected, they will sort of move away from their positions in the fingers, and that could mess things up. So I tend to leave that there. Now, technically, when you run an IK handle, there should not be any movement, but just in case there is, this is a nice little safety feature. The first thing we're going to do is duplicate the arm chains, right? Because again, just like we did with the legs, we're going to need IK, FK, and bind chains for the arms. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go up to the clavicle level here on both sides. I'm going to hit control. I'm just going to hit F so we can see where we are in the outliner here. And then let's close these down just to not make our outliner crazy. So right clavicle, left clavicle. Control D, Control D. So we made 2 copies of each. So the original ones, we're gonna go ahead and go to modify. Let's see. Search and replace names, and we're gonna look for. Let's start with the left side since we have it set for L underscore. I'm gonna look for L underscore and replace it with L underscore bind underscore. L underscore bind underscore. Hit that. Then we're going to go to the next left one, and we're going to look for L underscore and go with FK. Apply. Then the last one is IK and apply. Okay, now we go to the right side. So R underscore replace with R underscore bind underscore. Apply. This one is FK underscore. Apply. And this one is IK underscore. And replace. Okay, so there we've got our 6 joint chains renamed. And let's just take the numbers off the ends of these. Okay, so this is what we have here. We have the bind chains, the FK chains, and the IK chains. Okay. Then what we need to do, let's see. Well, we're going to start with the FK side of things. So I'm going to hide the bind and hide the IKs. So select those and hit Control H. So what we're left now with is the FK chains. Now, the first thing that we need to do is, wrong one, let's here. We need to get our our FK shoulders and just make them children of spine 6 because we don't need clavicle joints for those. So I'm going to delete those. Oh, you know what? Undo that. Let me rephrase that. What we need to do is make these children of the clavicle of the bind clavicles, because the bind chains are the only ones that are going to have clavicles. So we're going to take the so what I need to do is bring back my bind chains. So we're going to take the FK shoulder, and so this is the right side. I'm going to put it under the right bind clavicle. I'm going to take the left FK shoulder and put it under the left bind clavicle, and that's going to leave these 2 clavicle joints here, and we can delete those. Okay, so let's open these up here. And I'm going to close these down here. So the bind shoulders, I'm going to hide, leaving me with the FK shoulder on both sides, so right and left. Okay, so again, FK shoulder is a child of bind clavicle, because the clavicle joint is going to control all three joint chains. So we want to make sure that we put the FK, and we might as well just go ahead and put the IK under. So right IK goes under right bind clavicle, and left IK goes under left bind clavicle. Then we can delete the IK clavicles, and let's hide the IK joint chains. Okay, so the only thing we have visible here is the bind clavicle and the FK shoulders on both sides. Okay, so we're gonna start with the FK joint chains for this video, and in the next video we'll go on to the IK joint chains. All right, so now what we need to do is make controls. So we're doing FK, so we need FK controls. We need a shoulder, elbow, and wrist control. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a new type of FK control. Now before on the legs, I just used a simple NURBS circle like this. What I'm going to do here is something a little bit different. Let me turn my grid on here. I'm going to make sort of curve spheres. Okay, and the way that I do that, I'm just going to freeze the transformations on this over here. So the way that I do that, I'm going to duplicate this NURBS circle and rotate it 90 degrees in Z. I'm going to hold down J and just rotate it so I'm at 90 degrees there, and freeze transformations. Then I'm going to duplicate that one and rotate it, hold down J again and rotate it 90 degrees this way in the Y-axis. And again, I'm just going to freeze transformations. So this is what I have. I have 3 NURBS circles here, and basically what I want to do is create this sort of sphere-like shape here, but I want these to be a single curve. So just like we did with the IK-FK switcher controls here, we're going to do the same thing here. So if I right click here and go to shapes, I'm going to open up the 2 bottom ones, select both of these shape nodes, then select the transform node of this one. So I'm selecting the top node of the 3rd one, and I'm just going to type in parent -R space -S. Okay, and hit enter. And if that happens there, that means we did something wrong. So let's try this again. Again, I just want to make sure that I freeze transformations on everything so that it works. Let's try again. Take the shape nodes for the 2 bottom ones, and then the transform node for the top one. Parent -R -S, and there we go. Okay, so now when I deselect it and click on any one of them, you'll see that it will select the whole thing as a single curve, and then I can delete the other 2 transform nodes, and now this will be my NURBS sphere, or my curve sphere, that I'm going to use for my arm controls. So the other thing that we got to be careful of, oh, and it looks like we're fine. Sometimes the pivot point will be at the origin. Just center the pivot, modify center pivot to bring it over here. So let's duplicate this guy off here, Control D, and take that duplicate and snap it to the shoulder. Now I'm going to show my geometry here. So under my master control, I'm going to turn geometry on, because I need this control to not be too big or too small. I just need it to be a good size depending on the geometry, and that should probably be very good right there. Okay, let's duplicate it again. So Control D, activate your move tool, snap it to the elbow, and again bring back the geometry. And this one we can scale down a little bit further, maybe not so much. Okay, and then Control D, activate the move tool, and snap this one to the wrist, and again maybe I scale this one down just a little bit. Okay, so those will be our arm controls. Now I wish I'd remembered to change the colors before I duplicated them, but that's okay. Again, if we go in the attribute editor, and this time again, because now as you can see, we have a multiple shape nodes. We have 3 shape nodes, and if we do the color changing in the shape nodes, we're going to have to do it 3 times. But if we do it in the transform node, it's NURB circle 2 here, go to display, drawing overrides, enable overrides, and our left side is that bright red. So let's do that here again, and this one as well. Okay. And then in order to, well, before we mirror them over, how about we name them? So this is the left shoulder control. This is the left elbow control. And this one is the left wrist control. Okay. While we're here, we might as well just freeze their transformations. So freeze transforms just to zero them out as we would like. And what we can also do here is select the shoulder control, hit Control G to group it to itself. Select the elbow control, hit Control G to group it to itself, and the wrist control, Control G. Okay, and then go back to the shoulder one, and then let's hold down D and V and middle mouse drag that pivot. And we might have to get in real close here. So middle mouse that, oops, undo that, D and V, middle mouse that pivot to the joint. Select the second group here, middle mouse that pivot to the joint there. Third group, hold down D and V and undo that, hold down D and V and middle mouse that pivot to the joint. Okay, so let's open up all 3 of these groups, double click this, copy this, paste it into the group node, and then put buffer on the end of it. Elbow control, copy that, paste that, space buffer, and wrist control, copy that, paste that, space buffer. Okay, so again, we're just creating buffers to hold some of these junk values that we don't want to be put on the control. So the buffer is going to insulate our controls from those junk values and keep our controls nice and clean for the animator. Okay, so now that we have these done, I'm going to close these up. I'm going to select the 3 buffers, hold down Control G to group them together, and that's going to put a pivot point at the origin there. Control D to duplicate that group, put a -1 in the scale X of that group. As you can see, that's going to mirror them over to the right side. Okay, when we've got that, then we can open these up. You'll see that these are all left named. So I'm going to select these 3 here. I'm going to go to modify, and I'm going to go to search and replace, and I'm going to look for L underscore, replace it with R underscore, and let's make that caps, L underscore, R underscore, and apply. And did that not work? Let's try that. Maybe we might have to do it one by one. Oop, let's do that. Okay, so modify, search and replace. I had a thing in there. So let's select all 3 of those, hit apply. They should now be R underscores even, and make sure hierarchy is turned on so it does all the children as well. Let's close this, and let's select the left side ones, hit Shift P to take them out of their groups. Select the right side ones, hit Shift P to take those out of the groups, and delete the 2 groups. Now the right side ones, as you'll see, have a 180-degree rotation in Y. Let's go ahead and just freeze transformations on those. Okay, so now they're nice and clean, and all the controls are clean. Okay, so obviously the colors here need to be changed. So again, we got to do this in the transform node, and let's go green, and this one is green and green. Okay, oh, did I miss it? Yep, I missed it. There. So maintaining our color scheme here. There we go. So now the next thing that we have to do is orient our controls to the joints. Again, this is just a step that you want to have. You'll see that right now the controls are sort of oriented to world space. If you look at our little gizmo right here, we want these controls, so if I select the left shoulder, we want them to sort of be oriented along the joint, something like that. Okay, and we want to make sure we do that in an exact fashion, so we're going to use orient constraints. So I'm going to, because I'm aligning to my joint, the joint becomes the parent in that relationship and the control buffer becomes the child. So I'm going to select the joint first and then control click the shoulder buffer, and I'm going to make sure that my rigging menu set is open, go to constrain, and I'm going to go to orient again, making sure that I reset the settings, keep it at default values, maintain offset should be off. Okay, and I'm going to hit add. You'll see now that that orients that control buffer to the joint, and because the control is a child of that buffer, it gets rotated as well. So again, let's select the joint at the elbow, select the elbow buffer, hit G, and let's select the wrist joint. Might have to zoom in here. Let's select the wrist buffer and hit G, and you'll see that that has been rotated. Okay, then let's do the same on this side. Select this shoulder joint, select the right shoulder buffer, hit G, select the elbow joint, select the right elbow buffer, hit G, and select the wrist joint and the wrist buffer, hit G. Okay, so now we got a whole bunch of constraints. If we go ahead and open up all these buffers, we got a bunch of constraints here. So I'm going to go through and get all these orient constraints and delete them, because they were just there to help me align things. And now that I've aligned things, I don't need them. So if I look at my buffers, you'll see that I have values in there, but my controls are still zeroed out. So again, this is why we use the buffers. The buffers are going to hold these values. If I didn't have the buffers, these values would be on the controls, and that is not what we want. We don't want to give the animator a control that has values like this that are the values for sort of the default position, because then they have to sort of write down all these values in order to be able to get back to default pose. They'd have to plug in these values, which is, as you can imagine, and when you've got a bunch of controls on a character, to have to always remember the values to plug in just to get back to default is kind of ridiculous. So that's why we do this. Okay, let's just check something here. Yeah, something is off in my right side joints, as you can see. So I'm going to see, these are nicely aligned, but these ones are not. So we got to figure out what that issue is there. I think what happened was I did not realign the joints here. So I'm going to select my clavicle, and I'm going to, so this is a common mistake. Just forget, when you mirror over your joints, if you forget to reorient the joints, then you're going to get these kinds of issues happening here. You can see here that with these joints, my X is always pointing to my child joint. So if I want the same thing here, then I need to make sure that I do that. So here we go. I'm going to go to skeleton, orient joint, and let's see. I want the X as my primary. I want the Y as my secondary, and I want that Y to be pointing in the positive Y direction. Let's try that and hit apply. And yep, there we go. And if I do that and rotate these, you'll see that they rotate opposite to each other, which is kind of nice. If I rotate this way, you'll see that if a character is walking, it's nice to be able to just animate like this. If you're doing FK, that's going to give you opposite motion here, which arms generally move opposite to each other, so that's kind of a good thing to have here. And of course, I'm making sure that when I do reorient these joints, I'm doing it at the clavicle, and because the 3 different joint chains are children of that clavicle, they should all get the same orientation. So if I go to right FK shoulder and right IK shoulder, you can see that the axes are the same for both of those, and down this way as well. Okay, so that's just, I could edit this out and make it look like I got things right the first time, but I'm not going to do that because this, I want you guys to see the reality of rigging is sometimes you make mistakes and just you need to know how to fix them. As soon as I looked at this, I could see that something was off. Okay, and I wanted to make sure that I fix it before I go on, because these kinds of issues, orientation issues, if you don't fix them immediately, they will, come back and haunt you later. Once you set up all your arms and you realize that something's off, it's not working the way you want it to work, you're gonna have to go back and undo a lot of work just to fix it. So luckily I caught this before I got too far into the rig, so it's an easy fix right now. So what we have to do is reorient these buffers on the right side to the joints. So again, I'm going to select the elbow joint, select the shoulder joint. I'm going to select the shoulder buffer and do an orient. And there we go. Now you can see that it's lining up like I want. So select the elbow joint, select the elbow buffer, hit G, and then select the wrist joint and the wrist buffer, hit G. Now we can go through and delete those constraints. Okay, so now we are where we need to be. We are aligned with the joints and everything looks fine. All right, now back to where we were. What we need to do then, just like with the leg FK joints, so I'm going to switch this to FK mode. And oh, by the way, that's what I forgot to do with the IKFK switch controls. Now that they're set up, I can simply go ahead and lock and hide everything except IK to FK. So lock and hide selected, just leaving this IK to FK. So I'm going to switch it IK to FK. So I'm going to switch it FK mode. So what we need to do here let's start with the left side here. We need to go to the wrist buffer, drag it under the elbow control, then take the elbow buffer, drag it under the shoulder control. So when I rotate the shoulder, you can see that it takes all three with it. Now let's do the same on the right side. Take the wrist buffer, put it under the elbow control, take the elbow control buffer, put it under the shoulder control. So when I take my shoulder control and rotate it, it should rotate those other ones with it. Okay, so that is a step that you want to make sure you take. I'm going to save my work just because, you want to make sure you save because things will break on you. So you want to be able to go back to a file that works. All right. So setting up the controls here. Okay, here we go. So to get the arms to move with these controls, I'm going to select the control first, select the joint second, and do a constrain orient. And because we pre-oriented these controls to the joints, you'll see that there's no movement at all. Even though we're using an orient constraint with maintain offset off, there is no movement because everything's lined up as it should be. Do the same thing at the elbow. So control first, joint second, hit G, and you can see that when I do that and move it, now my joint chain is bending with the rotation of that control. And same thing at the shoulder, we're getting it working. Let's go on the right side. Control first, joint second, hit G. Go to the elbow, control first, joint second, hit G. You'll notice that I haven't done the wrists yet because they are a bit of a special case. So if we select this control here, there we go, everything works. Just check here with the shoulder. Yep, everything works there. Okay. We need to, there's a little extra stuff we got to do at the wrist. Okay, and the reason for that is that the twisting of the wrist, if we select this control here, the up and down motion will happen at the wrist, the side to side motion will happen at the wrist, but the twisting will happen starting at the forearm. That's just good. If you twist your own arm from the wrist, if you do a wrist twist on your own arm, you'll see that it's happening basically from the elbow down, right? It's not happening, it's not localized just to where the wrist is. Okay, it's happening up your entire forearm, and that's because your forearm is composed of two main bones, and I forget the names of them. I suppose I should have got that before I did this video, but it is what it is. You have two bones in your forearm that sort of rotate around each other as you twist at the wrist. So we're going to simulate that by putting in a forearm joint here. Okay, so let's start on the left side here. What we need to do is we're going to use an orient constraint for the wrist here, but so I'm going to select my control first, my joint second, then I'm going to go to constrain orient and let's go in the options here. So we want to use Y and Z. We don't want to constrain it on the X, because again, the X rotation being the twisting axis is going to happen from the forearm. So I'm going to use Y and Z and hit apply. Let's go on the right side. Select the control first, joint second, again Y and Z, and hit add. Okay, so as you can see, my constraints here are running from the Y and Z, and the X does not have a constraint. Okay, so that's where we are right now. Now we need to put in the forearm twisting. So the wrist twisting is something that we need to set up a little differently. So what I'm going to do is open up my node editor, and I'm going to, let's see, what is this one here? I'm going to make a new tab here. I want to call this one wrist twist. Okay, I'm going to bring in, let's start on the left side here. So I'm going to select this left this left FK control, the wrist control right there. Then I'm going to bring in the wrist and forearm joints. Okay, right there. That's what we have. So we have the wrist and we have the forearm here. Okay, now the way that this is going to work is the twist of the wrist control here is going to be divided by 2. I'm going to half it to put into the wrist, and then what's going to happen is I'm going to also take that half rotation and put it into, so let me go back. I'm going to take the rotation of the wrist control and cut it in half. Now I'm going to put that on the forearm control, on the forearm wrist joint, on the forearm joint, good Lord. And then I'm going to also put that same half rotation onto the wrist. And the reason that I do this is because the wrist being a child of the forearm, if I rotate the forearm half of the wrist rotation, it's also going to rotate half of the wrist rotation. And if I also add another half of the wrist rotation on that, that's going to bring it up to 100%, right? So the forearm is going to be 50%, the wrist is going to be 50%, then I'm going to add into it another 50%. That's going to bring it up to 100%. So we're going to get 100% rotation at the wrist joint and 50% rotation at the wrist. What did I just say? Yikes. Okay, so in my defense, it was late at night when I recorded that, and I guess I must have been sleepy because that was confusing as hell. All right, so what I'm going to do here is just try to explain that a little bit better. So we have the same file here, okay? These bars represent, this one is the forearm and the wrist control and the wrist joint. This is the wrist joint, this is the wrist controls one, just to show you the rotations and show you what I mean when I talk about splitting the rotation in half. Okay, so let's say we wanted to put a 90-degree rotation on this wrist control, right? So what do we want to happen at these joints? Well, at the forearm, I want to take that 90-degree rotation of the wrist control and split it in half so that I'm only getting a 45-degree rotation in the forearm. So I'm going to put a rotate X value of 45. Now, as soon as I do that, you'll see that the one at the wrist rotated with it, right? Because the forearm joint is the parent of the wrist joint. If I rotate the forearm joint, the wrist joint is going to rotate as well. Now, technically speaking, it has no rotations in it. But because its parent rotated, it also moved along with the parent and rotated that same amount. Now, it itself, if I put in another 45 in here, you'll see that that is going to match up to the rotation of the control. So this is what I want to do. I want to take half the rotation and put it in the forearm, and I want to take the half rotation again and put it in the wrist to add to the half rotation that's already happened from the forearm rotating. Okay, because the forearm is the parent of the wrist, if I rotate that forearm joint by 45 degrees, I'm going to get an automatic 45-degree rotation at the wrist as well. And then I'm just going to add the other 45 degrees to it to make it a full 90. Okay, so I'm getting 50% here and 100% here. I'm using double transformations to do it for me because I want my forearm rotation to be 0 at the elbow and then sort of increase as you go down to the wrist. So, half at the forearm and then 100% at the wrist. That's going to give me a nice fall off in that forearm wrist area. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I'm just trying to get things to work smoothly because, again, forearm twist does not happen just at the wrist. It happens all the way up the arm, technically from the elbow. But if we put half the rotation in the forearm and then 100% of it in the wrist, we're going to get a nice fall off between the elbow and the wrist. Okay, hopefully that makes more sense. And back to the video. Okay, and in order to do that, I'm going to go here into the node editor. So we have our wrist and our forearm. And I'm going to make a multiply divide node. So I'm going to hit tab and start typing in multiply divide. And when it comes up, I'm going to click on it. So I'm going to rename this to left wrist divide. I'm just going to div for divide, I guess. Okay. So if I double click this wrist multiply divide node, I'm going to set the operation to divide. And since I want to divide by 2 to get a half of the value, I'm just going to set my input 2 to 2. Okay. Then I'm going to take the rotate X, open this up, take the rotate X of the wrist control and put it into input 1. And let's try that again. Oh, right. Input 1X. Here we go. So put that into input 1X. And if it doesn't make the connection, it means you have a locked thing here. So now when I do that, it should. And I'm going to collapse down my conversion node here. And again, conversion nodes is just a necessary evil. They're kind of annoying, but they exist for a reason. Okay. So I'm going to take my rotate X and run it into the input 1X of the multiply node, which is here. And that's just going to divide that by 2. And then the output X is going to then be put into my forearm rotate X. Okay. And again, conversion node, just collapse it down to the smallest that it can be. Okay, and then again, I'm going to do the same thing. Output X to rotate X right there. So output X to rotate X and our conversion node right there. Okay, so because the FK wrist is getting that same 50% rotation, and then compounded with the 50% rotation that comes from the fact that the wrist is a child of the forearm. So if the forearm rotates by that 50%, then the wrist is also going to rotate by the 50%. And then we're going to also add its own 50% rotation. That's going to bring it up to 100%. So let's see what we have. Okay, so I'm just going to close this and let's put in a number in rotate X here. So if we do 40, let's do a 40-degree rotation in the wrist control. We should have a 20-degree rotation in the forearm, as you can see that we do. And we should have a 20-degree rotation in the wrist, as you can see we do. But because there's this 20-degree rotation here, that's going to add to the 20-degree rotation that's right here to give us a full 40 degrees rotation at the wrist. Okay, does that make sense? So if we rotate here, you can see that my forearm joint is rotating so that I can get the correct amount of rotation in that forearm. Okay, let's do the same for the right side. I'm going to select my right wrist control, the wrist joint, forearm joint. Going to go to Windows, Node Editor. And this is the first setup that we did, and I'm going to bring in the other ones. Hit that plus button. Oh, I totally deselected them. So again, control, wrist joint, forearm joint, and we're going to add this to the graph here. And let's separate them. So forearm and wrist. And let's duplicate this multiply divide node. Did I control D? Why isn't it working? And again, this thing is locked, so I think I might have made a bunch of them, but okay. There we go. Okay, and because that was locked, I'm going to go in the Hypershade here and see if I can find those multiply divide nodes. So under Utilities, and this is the wrist one, and I need to delete these two. Okay, so back here, I'm going to take this off here, and I'm going to switch this to right. So right wrist divide node, I'm going to open up my rotates, open up my input 1, and open up my output X. And then open up my rotates here. Okay, so again, rotate X goes into input 1X. Output X goes into rotate X of the FK forearm. And let's get our conversion nodes. Let's zoom in real close here. And this one is here, so we'll collapse that. And this one is here. So we'll collapse that. There we go. And again, because we just duplicated the one that we did before, it should be set to divide by 2. And there we go. And then plug this also into, let's open up the rotate X here. So plug this into rotate X and pull down this conversion node here. Collapse it by hitting 1 on the keyboard, and there we go. Okay, and now that this is set up, I'm going to lock this so that it can't be altered. So again, let's look at this one here. Let's rotate 50 degrees here. So I should have a 25 in there, which I do, and I should have a 25 in the wrist, which I do. Okay, so that should be set up and good to go. Okay, now that we've done that, we've set up the FK arms here. And what we need to do, because these controls only ever rotate, they don't translate, they don't scale, I'm going to select my translates and my scales and visibility and lock and hide selected. Okay, so all of them now should be just have rotates. Now the elbows, we can actually go further and get rid of rotate X and Z and lock and hide selected. So now they only bend in this axis. They don't need to break in the other axes. As you can imagine, we don't need to go up and down like that. So this is going to work just fine. Okay, so the elbows are going to have rotate Y. Everything else is going to have the 3 rotate channels and so on and so forth. So if I hold on shift and open these up here, I'm going to right click on here and turn off shapes just to make things cleaner. And let's open these. If I go to all the buffers here, buffer, 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 and I'm going to lock and hide everything except for visibility. And again, so lock and hide everything, leave visibility in there because we have to make it so that when you're in FK mode, then the FK controls appear and the IK controls disappear. So we're going to do that through visibility. So we're going to leave that open for right now. We'll close it later. Okay, so the other thing we can do is just take the FK shoulder joints and Control H to hide them. And that should fix that. Oh, actually, you know what? Let me go back here. Before we do that, remember that when we first made this skeleton, we set the rotate orders to X, Y, Z for the shoulder, X, Z. Let's see, let's do that again. X, Y, Z for the shoulder, X, Z, Y for the elbow, Y, Z, X for the wrist, for the forearm, and then X, Y, Z for the wrist. So we need to make sure that our controls, and I want to, did we do that for the legs? Please tell me we did that for the legs. We probably didn't do that for the legs, so we're going to make sure that we do that for the legs. But right now, I have XYZ on the shoulder, and that's the default, so my control is at XYZ. Let's go to the elbow. I got XZY, so I got to make sure that my control is at XZY. And at the wrist, we have XYZ, and that's the default, so my control is at XYZ. Again, we have an XYZ at the shoulder. We have an XZY at the elbow to match up with the joint, and then we have an XYZ, which is the default at the wrist. Now let's go ahead and do it for the legs as well. So at the hip, we have XYZ, which we have there. At the knee, we have XZY, again XZY. Let's do it for this side as well, XZY. You always got to make sure that your controls have the same exact rotation orders as your joints. So this joint here, XYZ, so this should stay XYZ, XYZ for the toes, for the ball joint, so we're going to keep that at XYZ. Okay, so that's what we need to do there. Make sure that your rotation orders match, otherwise things will not quite work out as you would expect. So XZY on these, XZY on that, and then XZY at the knees, XZY. Okay, I'm going to save my file so make sure I don't lose anything here. All right, so moving on. So now we have our FK arm set up ready to go. You can see as I rotate it, everything works as expected, and if I twist it, then I get the rotations that I need. So let's do the other side. You can see everything goes with it. And we're going to rotate in the Y just like that. Okay, so everything seems to work. Let's undo back till it's back at its default positions. So in the next video, we're going to go into doing the IK setup. And you know, while we're here, I'm going to take both shoulder buffers and put them inside of the controls group. And as soon as I do that, I should be able to scale this up and down. And you can see that my FK controls scale perfectly as I expect them to do. And I can rotate the entire rig and have everything stay together and not break on me. And even when it's rotated, I can scale it and have everything scale up as it's supposed to do. Okay, that is how we know that everything is working correctly. Set my scale back to 1. Okay, now with that done, we can move on to the IK arm setup. And we'll do that in the next video. So please comment, like, subscribe. Let me know how you're enjoying the tutorials, if it's working for you, and if you have anything that you would like me to do, by all means, let me know. All right, see you in the next video.